The Chrysalids, Chapter 6, Part 1. In the evening, when I grew calmer, I found that Rosalind was trying to talk to me. Some of the others were anxiously asking what was the matter, too. And so I told them about Sophie. It wasn't a secret anymore now, and I could feel that they were shocked. I tried to explain that a person with a deviation, a small deviation at any rate, wasn't the monstrosity we had been told. It did not really make any difference, not to Sophie at any rate. They received this information very doubtfully indeed. The things we had all been taught were against their acceptance, though they knew well enough that what I was telling them must be true, at least for me. You can't lie when you talk with your thoughts. They wrestled with the idea that a deviation might not be disgusting and evil after all, but not very successfully. Under the circumstances, they could not give me much consolation, and I was not sorry when, one by one, they dropped out of the conversation, and I knew they had fallen asleep. I was tired myself, but sleep was a long time coming. I lay there, picturing Sophie and her parents plodding their way southwards, towards the doubtful safety of the fringes, and hoping desperately that they would be far enough off now for my betrayal not to hurt them. And then, when sleep did come, it was full of dreams. Faces and people moved restlessly through it. Scenes, too. Once more, there was the one where we all stood around in the yard, while my father disposed of an offense, which was Sophie. And I woke up from that, hearing my own voice shouting to him to stop. And I was too afraid to go to sleep again. But I did, and that time it was quite different. I dreamed once again of that great city by the sea, with houses and streets, and things that flew through the sky. It had been years since I had dreamed about it, but it still looked just the same. And in some quite strange, obscure way, it soothed me. My mother looked in on me in the morning, but she was detached and disapproving. My sister Mary was the one who took charge, and she decreed that there were to be no getting up that day. I was to lie on my stomach and not wiggle around, so that my back could heal more quickly. I took her instructions meekly, for it was certainly more comfortable to do as she said. So I lay there and considered what preparations I should have to make for running away, once I was able to be up and about again, and the stiffness had worn off. It would, I decided, be much better to have a horse, and I spent most of the morning working on a plan for stealing one and riding off to the fringes. The inspector looked in on me in the afternoon, bringing with him a bag of candy, and for a moment I thought of trying to get something from him, casually of course, about what the fringes were really like. After all, as the expert on deviation, he should be expected to know more about the fringes than anyone else. But on second thought, however, I decided that might be unwise. He was sympathetic and kindly enough, but he was on a mission. He put his questions to me in a friendly way, and munching one of the sweets himself, he asked me, "How long have you known that the Wender child, what's her name, by the way?" I told him. There was no harm in that now. "How long have you known that Sophie deviates?" I didn't see that telling the truth could make things any worse. "Quite a long time," I admitted. "And how long would that be?" "Oh, about 6 months, I suppose," I told him. He raised his eyebrows and then looked very serious. "That's bad, you know," he said. "It's what we call abetting a concealment. You must have known it was wrong, didn't you?" And I dropped my gaze. I wriggled uncomfortably under his stare, and then I stopped because it made my back twinge. "It sort of didn't seem like the things they say in church," I tried to explain. "Besides, they're awfully tiny toes." The inspector took another candy and pushed the bag back to me. "And each foot shall have 5 toes," he quoted. "Do you remember that part?" "Yes," I admitted unhappily. "Well, every part of the definition is as important as any other, and if a child doesn't fit inside it, then it isn't human. And that means no soul. It is not the image of God. It is an imitation. And in the imitations, there is always some mistake. Only God produces perfection. So although deviations may look like us in many ways, they cannot be really human. They are something quite different. And I thought that over. But Sophie isn't really any different, not in any other way, I told him. You'll find this easier to understand when you get older, but you do know the definition, and you must have realized that Sophie deviated. So why didn't you tell your father, or me, about her? And so I explained about my dreams of my father treating Sophie as he did one of the farm animal offenses. The inspector looked at me thoughtfully for some seconds, and then he nodded. I see, he said. But blasphemies are not treated the same as offenses. Well, what happens to them? I asked. He evaded the question and went on. You know, it's really my duty to include your name in my report. However, as your father has already taken action, I might be able to leave it out. All the same, this is a most serious matter. The devil sends his deviations among us to weaken us and tempt us away from purity. Sometimes he is clever enough to make a nearly perfect imitation, so we always have to be on the lookout for the small mistake he has made, however small it might be. And then when we see it, we must report it at once. You'll remember this in the future, won't you? I avoided his eye. The inspector was the inspector, and an important person. All the same, I could simply not believe that the devil had sent Sophie. I found it hard to see how the very small toe on each foot could make much difference either. Sophie is my friend, I said, my best friend. The inspector kept on looking at me, and then he shook his head and sighed. Loyalty is a great virtue, but there is such a thing as misguided loyalty. One day, you'll understand the importance of a greater loyalty, the purity of the race. But he broke off as the door opened, and my father came in. They got them, all three of them, he said to the inspector, and gave me a look of disgust. The inspector got up promptly, and they went out together, and I stared at the closed door. The misery of self-hatred struck me so that I shook all over. I could hear myself whimpering as tears rolled down my cheeks. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't. The pain in my back forgotten, the anguish that my father's news had caused me, was far more painful than any of that. My chest was so tight that I thought I was choking. Presently, the door opened again. I kept my face to the wall as steps crossed the room, and a hand rested on my shoulder. And the inspector's voice said, It wasn't that. You had nothing to do with it. A patrol picked them up, quite by chance, 20 miles away. A couple of days later, I visited Uncle Axel. I'm going to run away, I said. He paused in his work and gazed thoughtfully at his saw. I'd not do that, he advised. It doesn't usually work very well. Besides, he added after a pause, where would you run off to? Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, I explained. He shook his head. Whatever district you're in, they want to see your normalcy certificate, he told me. Then they know who you are and where you're from. Well, not in the fringes, I suggested. He stared at me. Man alive, you'd not want to go to the fringes. Why, they've got nothing there. Not even enough food. Most of them is half starving. That's why they make the raids on us. No, you'd spend all your time there just trying to stay alive, and lucky if you did so. But there must be some other places, I said. Only if you can find a ship that'll take you. And even then, he shook his head again, in my experience, he told me, if you run away from a thing just because you don't like it, you don't like what you find at the other end either. Now, running to a thing, that's different. But what would you want to run to? Take it from me, Davy. It's a lot better here than it is in most places. No, I'm against it. In a few years' time, when you're a man and can look after yourself, it might be different. I reckon it would be better to stick it out till then, anyway. Much better than have them just catch you and bring you back here. There was something to that. I was beginning to learn the meaning of the word humiliation, and did not want any more of it at present. But from what he said, the question of where to go would not be easily solved. It looked as if it would be advisable to learn what I could of the world outside Labrador in preparation. I asked him what it was like. Godless, he told me. Very godless indeed. This was the sort of uninformative answer my father would have given me. I was so disappointed to have it from Uncle Axel, and I told him that, and he grinned. All right, Davy boy, that's fair enough. So long as you don't chatter, I'll tell you something about it. You mean it's a secret? I asked, puzzled. Well, not quite a secret, he said. But when people are used to believing a thing has to be such and such a way, and the preachers tell them to believe that, and that that's the way it is, it's trouble you'll get, and not thanks, for trying to change their ideas. Us sailors soon found that out in Rigo, so mostly we only talk about it to other sailors. If the rest of the people want to think it's nearly all Badlands out there, let them think it. It doesn't change the way it really is, but it does make for peace and quiet. But my books say it's all Badlands, or really bad fringes country, I told him. There are other books that don't say that, but you'll not see them here much, not even in Rigo, he said. And mind you, it doesn't go to believe everything every sailor will say either, and you're often not sure whether any couple of them are talking about the same place or not, even if they think they are. But when you've seen some of it, you begin to understand that the world is a much stranger place than it looks from here in Waknuk. So you keep it to yourself. I assured him I would. All right, well, it's like this, he began. To reach the rest of the world, my Uncle Axel explained, you start by sailing down the river from Rigo until you get to the sea. They say it's no good sailing on straight ahead to the east, that is, because the sea goes on forever. Or maybe it comes to an end suddenly and you sail right over the edge. Nobody really knows for sure. And if you turn and head north and keep along the coast, and still keep along it when it turns to the west and south again, well, you'll just reach the other side of Labrador. Or, if you just keep going straight on to the north, you'll come to colder parts, where there are a great many islands, with not too much living there, except birds and sea creatures. And to the northeast, they say, there is a great land, where the plants aren't very deviational, and the animals and people don't look deviational. But the women are very tall and strong, and they rule their country entirely. And they keep their men in cages until they're about 24 years old, and then they eat them. They'll also eat shipwrecked sailors. But, as no one ever seems to have met anyone who has actually been there and escaped, it's difficult to see how this can even be known. Still, there's the story, and no one has ever come back to deny it either. But the only way I know is to the south. I've been south on 3 trips, and to get there, just keep the coast to your right-hand side as you leave the river. And after a couple of 100 miles or so, you come to the big Straits of Newf. And as the straits widen out, keep the coast of Newf on your right side, and call in at that place called Lark to get some fresh water, and food too, if them Newf people will let you have any. After that, head southeast a while, then south, and then find the mainland coast again off to your right. And when you reach it, you will find it is Badlands, or at least very bad fringes. Now there's plenty of things growing there, but sailing close inshore you can see that nearly all of it is deviational. There are animals too, and most of them look as if it would be difficult to classify them as offenses, because you don't even know what kind of they're supposed to be. And a day or two further sail, there's plenty of Badland coastline, with no doubt about that. Soon, you'll follow around the edge of a big bay, and then you get to where there are no gaps at all. It's just Badlands. Well, when sailors first saw these parts, they were pretty scared. They felt that they were leaving all of purity behind and sailing further and further away from God, where He'd not be able to come help them. And everybody knows that if you walk on Badlands, you're going to get sick and die. And they'd none of them expected ever to see them so close with their own eyes. But what worried them the most, and what worried the people they talked to when they got back, was to see how all these things which are supposed to be against God's laws of nature grow so well there, just as if they had a right to.